Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey, not on a leisurely cruise down the Nile, but a sudden, jarring plunge into the deep past. Imagine this one moment you're comfortable, perhaps scrolling through your phone, and the next, you're standing in ancient Egypt, roughly 3,000 years ago. The air is hot, dry, and smells utterly unfamiliar, a blend of dust, stale sweat, animals, and something vaguely floral, but also faintly acrid. Your modern clothes feel ridiculously out of place, drawing curious, confused stares from figures in linen kilts. You quickly realize that this isn't the pristine, golden Egypt of documentaries and museums. This is real, raw, ancient life, and honestly, you probably won't survive a full day here without serious discomfort, if not worse. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling adventurous, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just arrived, perhaps materializing in the middle of a bustling market in Memphis or Thebes, or maybe on the dusty banks of the Nile. Your senses are immediately overwhelmed. The sunlight is blindingly bright, reflecting off the ochre-colored earth and the white stone buildings. The sounds are a cacophony of animal braying, human chatter, the rhythmic thud of a distant potter's wheel, and the shouts of vendors. Your modern sensibilities are instantly assaulted by the sheer unfamiliarity of everything. The first thing you'd likely notice is the heat. It's intense, dry, and relentless, beating down from a sky that seems impossibly blue. You're already sweating, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of dust clinging to your exposed skin. Your clothes, designed for comfort in a climate-controlled world, are entirely unsuited for this environment, making you stand out like a sore thumb and immediately uncomfortable. Then there are the smells. Not the sweet incense you might associate with temples, but a complex, pervasive aroma of human sweat, animal dung, stale cooking oil, and the ever-present dust. It's an organic, earthy smell that speaks of a life lived intimately with the land and with very different standards of hygiene. You might catch a whiff of something else, too. Something vaguely sweet and cloying, perhaps a hint of fermentation from beer brewing, or something more unsettling from the local slaughterhouse. The people around you are dressed simply, mostly in linen. They move with a purposeful stride, accustomed to the sun and the heat. Their faces, often dark from exposure, carry expressions that reflect a life of hard work, strong faith, and pragmatic resilience. They stare at you, your strange clothes and bewildered expression marking you immediately as an outsider, someone profoundly out of place. One mainstream historical fact that you'd immediately grapple with is that ancient Egypt, despite its monumental achievements in architecture and art, was a challenging environment for daily life, characterized by a hot, arid climate, rudimentary sanitation, constant exposure to disease, and a pervasive societal reliance on manual labor, making everyday survival far more difficult and less comfortable than modern living. The grandiosity of the pharaohs often overshadows the gritty reality for the common person. Think of all those amazing temples. Someone had to build them in that heat, by hand. A particularly quirky tidbit that would quickly highlight your alien status is the pervasive use of eye paint kohl by almost everyone, regardless of gender or social status, not just for decoration, but also believed to ward off evil spirits and, more practically, to reduce glare from the intense sun like ancient sunglasses. Imagine walking into a crowd where everyone has dramatic eyeliner, even the farmers and laborers. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of kohl in ancient Egypt was primarily a religious or aesthetic practice, emphasizing beauty and protection from the evil eye, or if its lead-based components actually had incidental antimicrobial properties that offered some protection against eye infections in a dusty, unhygienic environment. Was it divine protection or accidental hygiene? You try to speak, but the words that come out of your mouth are utterly incomprehensible to those around you. Ancient Egyptian, a language far removed from anything you know, fills the air around you, a torrent of unfamiliar sounds. The language barrier immediately renders you helpless, unable to ask for help, to understand instructions, or even to express your basic needs. You're alone, adrift in a sea of foreign tongues, a profound isolation in a bustling crowd. The very rhythm of life is different. There are no cars, no electric lights, no sound of distant traffic. The days are dictated by the sun and the agricultural cycles of the Nile. The nights are truly dark, lit only by oil lamps or the moon and stars, filled with the sounds of animals and the quiet murmurs of a sleeping city. You feel the overwhelming sensory input, the discomfort, the confusion, and the growing realization that your brief visit to ancient Egypt is less of a pleasant historical immersion and more of an immediate, profound struggle for survival. And as the sun climbs higher, intensifying the heat and the smells, you begin to grasp just why you wouldn't survive a day in ancient Egypt, not with your modern sensibilities and complete lack of preparation for its harsh, unfiltered reality. Every minute here is a test of your endurance, a plunge into a world utterly unlike your own. As you stand bewildered amidst the cacophony of ancient Egypt, one inescapable reality immediately begins to assert its brutal dominance over your modern, unprepared body. The sun relentless, scorching. Forget air conditioning, chilled water bottles, or even a wide-brimmed hat. In this ancient land, the sun isn't just a light source, it's a relentless, dehydrating tormentor, beating down with an intensity that will quickly push your body to its absolute limits, making sunstroke and exhaustion not just possibilities, but near certainties within hours. You quickly realize that staying hydrated is a constant, desperate battle, and that the beautiful, cloudless sky is actually a glaring, life-sapping enemy. It's like being trapped in a giant, open-air oven that just keeps getting hotter, and your only defense is your increasingly inadequate linen tunic. You feel the sweat begin to bead on your brow almost instantly, then trickle down your temples, mixing with the ever-present dust. Your modern clothes, even light ones, feel heavy and suffocating against your skin, trapping the heat rather than allowing it to dissipate. The air itself feels dry and hot, burning your nostrils with every breath. You might try to find shade, instinctively gravitating towards the narrow alleys between buildings, but even there, the heat radiates from the sun-baked stone, offering little true relief. The sun in Egypt isn't just a little warm, it's a constant, blazing furnace, particularly during the long summer months when temperatures can easily soar past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius in the shade, and feel much hotter in the direct sun. And there's rarely a cloud in the sky to offer respite. This relentless exposure, combined with physical exertion even just walking, quickly drains your body of precious fluids. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the daily struggle against this environmental force is that the scorching, relentless sun and arid climate of ancient Egypt posed a constant threat of heat stroke and dehydration. forcing its inhabitants to adapt through specific clothing like linen, architectural design, thick walls, small windows for shade, and a constant focus on water consumption. Something a modern, unprepared visitor would quickly succumb to. The heat wasn't just weather, it was a fundamental challenge of existence. Imagine the onset of dehydration. You'd start feeling a persistent thirst, far more intense than anything you've ever experienced. Your mouth would become dry, your lips cracked. Then would come the headaches, the dizziness, the profound fatigue. Your body, desperately trying to cool itself, would continue to sweat, but eventually, your sweat glands might fail, leading to a terrifying rise in internal body temperature. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the Egyptians' understanding of how to combat the heat is their use of white or light-colored linen clothing. This wasn't just for fashion. Linen is a highly breathable fabric that helps to wick away moisture and reflect sunlight, keeping the wearer cooler than heavier materials. Imagine trying to navigate ancient Egypt in your modern dark-colored clothes, absorbing all that heat, while everyone else is comfortably, relatively speaking, clad in breathable white. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of eye paint kohl in ancient Egypt was primarily for religious or aesthetic reasons, or if its reflective properties due to lead compounds and actual physical barrier around the eyes also provided a practical benefit in reducing sun glare and protecting against intense UV radiation, acting as an ancient form of natural sunglasses. Did it offer spiritual protection or accidental practical comfort against the sun? If dehydration progresses, you'd begin to experience the symptoms of heat stroke. Your skin might become hot and dry if you stop sweating. Your pulse would quicken, and your mind would become confused, disoriented. You might stumble, lose consciousness, or even begin to hallucinate. Without immediate rehydration and cooling, heat stroke can be fatal. In ancient Egypt, far from any modern medical intervention, such a collapse in the unforgiving sun would likely lead to a swift, unceremonious end. The local inhabitants, accustomed to the sun from birth, move differently. They learn to conserve energy, to seek shade during the hottest parts of the day, and to constantly sip water or thin beer. Their clothing, the light linen, is perfectly adapted. Your unfamiliar body, however, would struggle immensely to cope. You'd constantly be looking for water, feeling its scarcity in the dry, dusty air. Public wells or the Nile itself would be your only options, but as we'll discuss later, these sources came with their own set of deadly perils. For now, the most immediate threat is the relentless, burning orb in the sky. You feel the sweat stinging your eyes, the dry rasp in your throat, and the slow, insidious drain of energy from your body. Your skin is already beginning to feel uncomfortably hot, a prelude to the true misery of heat exposure. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the unfamiliar culture, it's about the relentless, scorching sun, a primary, omnipresent force that would quickly push your unprepared body to its breaking point, transforming a simple sunny day into a life-threatening ordeal, reminding you that sometimes the biggest dangers aren't seen, but felt deep within your very cells. Even as your body struggles against the relentless assault of the Egyptian sun, your other senses, particularly your nose, are immediately overwhelmed by another pervasive and inescapable reality: hygiene filth and body odor. Forget the deodorants, daily showers, and fresh laundry of your world. Ancient Egypt, despite its impressive public works, operated on a completely different standard of cleanliness, where human and animal waste, stale sweat, and general grime were constant companions, creating a potent, inescapable, olfactory landscape. You quickly learn that staying clean is an impossible dream, and that the city itself smells like a permanent, very busy barnyard mixed with an unemptied garbage bin. It's like stepping into a giant, living aroma bomb, and every breath you take is a personal assault on your modern sensibilities. You walk through the narrow, unpaved streets of a town, and the smell is omnipresent: the dry heat. Remember that. It doesn't just dehydrate you, it intensifies every single odor. Human and animal waste, including donkey dung and camel droppings, are common sights and smells on the streets, left to accumulate until they are eventually swept away or simply baked by the sun. There are no municipal garbage collections as you know them, so refuse often piles up in alleys or outside homes, contributing to the general stench. Flies buzz constantly, drawn to the filth, landing on everything and everyone. One mainstream historical fact that utterly contrasts with any notion of ancient Egyptian cleanliness is that ancient Egyptian cities and daily life, despite ritual bathing practices for some, suffered from pervasive unsanitary conditions due to rudimentary waste disposal, open sewers, and a lack of understanding of germ theory, leading to widespread body odor and a constant presence of human and animal filth in public spaces. This created an environment ripe for disease transmission. Think of it, every step you take is a gamble against stepping into something truly vile, and every breath is full of it. Imagine your own skin, constantly sweating in the heat, now coated in fine dust that mixes with the sweat to form a grimy film. Bathing, while practiced, was often limited. While the wealthy might have access to private bathing facilities, the common person would rely on public access to the Nile or communal wells for washing, which themselves might be less than pristine. Daily soap, as you know it, didn't exist. Basic cleansing involved natron, yes? The mummification salt, or alkaline plant ashes mixed with oil, which was more of a defoliant than a fragrant cleanser. You'd wash, but never truly feel clean. A particularly quirky tidbit that reveals the lengths some Egyptians went to combat body odor without modern products is the use of aromatic oils and perfumes made from frankincense, myrrh, or lily petals. These expensive unguents were highly prized, not just for ritual purposes, but to mask the pervasive odors of daily life. Imagine desperately rubbing perfumed oil all over your skin, hoping it would cover up the smell of stale sweat and horse dung, only for the two scents to combine into something even stranger. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of perfumes and fragrant oils in ancient Egypt was primarily a religious and aesthetic practice, associated with purity and beauty for the gods, or if it was also a crucial practical necessity, serving as a social lubricant and personal defense against the overwhelming body odor and environmental smells prevalent in an unhygienic society. Was it for the gods, or for basic social acceptance? The pervasive body odor is not just your own, it's everyone else's. The dry heat and constant exertion meant that people sweated profusely, and without daily washing or modern deodorants, the smell of stale human perspiration mingled with the scents of their diets, clung to everything. Walking through a crowded market meant an unavoidable, intimate encounter with the collective aroma of thousands of unwashed bodies. You'd find yourself instinctively holding your breath, or trying to breathe through your mouth, anything to escape the constant assault on your olfactory senses. The clothing, mostly simple linen tunics, while breathable, remember that from the sun section, would quickly absorb these odors and the ubiquitous dust, becoming perpetually grimy. The absence of modern laundering techniques meant that clothes were rarely truly clean, simply aired out or given a superficial rinse, and then reworn. You'd always feel a bit scratchy, a bit sticky, a bit off. Even the animals, crucial to daily life donkeys, cattle, poultry, contributed to the general filth, their waste, their own body odors, and the flies they attracted were all part of the sensory backdrop of ancient Egyptian life. You feel the grime clinging to your skin, the sweat drying to a crust, and the constant, overwhelming assault of smells that seem to penetrate every part of your being. You try to take a deep breath, only to be met with another wave of acrid, organic scents. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the heat or the cultural shock. It's about the pervasive, inescapable reality of hygiene. Your modern sensibilities would be constantly, brutally assaulted by the filth and body odor that were simply a normal, accepted part of daily existence, making every minute a test of your stomach and your nose, a constant reminder that cleanliness, as you know it, was a luxury centuries away. As your body struggles with the relentless heat and your nose protests the pervasive filth, your parched throat demands relief, but the life-giving liquid you desperately crave presents another profound and often deadly peril: water, contaminated, deadly. Forget the clean, treated tap water of your modern world. In ancient Egypt, your primary water source, the mighty Nile, was a vibrant artery of life, but also a teeming highway for disease, teeming with unseen killers that could bring swift, agonizing illness. You quickly learn that every sip is a gamble with your health, and that the very essence of Egyptian life could also be its most dangerous poison. It's like being desperately thirsty. But your only option is to drink from a river that doubles as a sewer and a graveyard. You stumble towards the riverbank, or perhaps a communal well, desperate for a drink. The sight of the Nile, broad and majestic, might initially seem inviting, but a closer look reveals its true nature. It's teeming with life. Yes, but also with death. People bathe in it. Animals drink from it. Waste is often dumped into it, and its banks are frequented by countless creatures. There are no filtration plants, no chlorination, no understanding of bacteria. The water might look brown and murky, especially after the annual flood, but its true dangers are invisible. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines this pervasive threat is that the Nile River, while central to ancient Egyptian life and agriculture, was also a major source of waterborne diseases, including dysentery, typhoid, cholera, and parasitic infections like schistosomiasis due to contamination from human and animal waste, lack of sanitation, and the absence of modern water purification methods. Drinking untreated water was a constant health gamble. Imagine dipping your cup into the river. The water is lukewarm, perhaps carrying a faint, earthy taste, or even a subtle tang of decay. You drink it anyway, because thirst is overwhelming. But your modern mind recoils from the knowledge of what microscopic horrors might be lurking within. You'd likely be ingesting countless bacteria, viruses, and parasites with every sip, leading to agonizing stomach cramps, relentless diarrhea, and debilitating fevers. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the Egyptians' attempts to make water safer without understanding germ theory is their practice of allowing water to stand for a time to let sediment settle, or adding small amounts of alum, a coagulant, to help clarify it. They also frequently consumed beer or wine. Remember those beverages from the Viking section? They were popular in Rome too, as the fermentation process and alcohol content could kill some pathogens, making them safer alternatives to raw water. Imagine desperately trying to clarify murky water with a pinch of a mineral, or choosing beer over water simply because it felt safer, without knowing why. Historians still argue whether the widespread consumption of low-alcohol beer as a daily beverage in ancient Egypt was primarily a nutritional choice providing calories and liquids, or if its fermentation properties genuinely played a significant, albeit unintentional, role in public health by offering a safer hydration source than the potentially highly contaminated Nile water, thus mitigating some disease risks. Was it about calories or accidental sanitation? Beyond the Nile, communal wells could also be highly contaminated. If the well was shallow, or located near burial grounds or areas of human and animal waste, its groundwater could easily become polluted. Even water stored in large jars or cisterns could become stagnant and attract insects, or allow bacterial growth over time, especially in the hot climate. The impact of waterborne diseases on the ancient Egyptian population was immense. Dysentery and other diarrheal diseases were rampant, particularly among children, and were major causes of mortality. Parasitic infections, especially schistosomiasis caused by flatworms found in fresh water, were endemic, leading to chronic illness, organ damage, and a shortened lifespan. You might see people with swollen bellies, a common symptom of parasitic infection, or suffering from chronic, debilitating digestive issues, all linked to the very water that sustained them. Your body, unaccustomed to such a high pathogenic load, would react violently. A severe bout of dysentery, with its rapid dehydration, could quickly prove fatal without modern medical intervention. Even if you survived, your digestive system would be constantly battling unseen invaders, leaving you weak, exhausted, and vulnerable to other ailments. You feel the overwhelming thirst, the desperate need for liquid. But as you gulp down the lukewarm, earthy water, a knot of dread tightens in your stomach. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the heat or the general filth. It's about the pervasive, invisible danger lurking in every drop of water. The very source of life, the majestic Nile, was also a conduit for disease and death, turning the simple act of quenching your thirst into a constant, horrifying gamble. A chilling reminder that the hidden dangers of ancient life were often the most lethal. Even if you manage to quench your thirst with the dubious, potentially deadly water, your body still craves sustenance. But the food awaiting you in ancient Egypt presents another set of grim realities. Food monotonous, unsanitary, forget the diverse, fresh, and safely prepared meals of your modern life. The ancient Egyptian diet, while providing necessary calories, was largely bland, repetitive, and often consumed under conditions that would make any modern health inspector faint, turning every meal into a cautious gamble with your digestive system. You quickly learn that hunger might drive you to eat, but your palate and your stomach will constantly rebel against the reality of ancient fare. It's like being at a permanent, incredibly dusty, all-you-can-eat buffet where every dish is some variation of bread, and flies are the main ingredient. You find yourself in a humble Egyptian home, or perhaps a bustling street stall, as the midday meal is prepared. The air is thick with the smell of baking bread, dust, and the pervasive odor of human and animal activity. Remember that general filth we talked about. It's still very much present. Flies buzz constantly, landing on food, on faces, on everything. This isn't a kitchen with gleaming surfaces or strict hygiene protocols. It's an open-air environment, exposed to the elements and all their accompanying contaminants. Your primary staple is bread, often made from emmer wheat or barley, Baked in conical molds or on flat griddles, it's coarse, dense, and often gritty, as ancient milling techniques frequently left behind small fragments of millstone grit. You bite into a piece, feeling the rough texture on your tongue, perhaps finding a piece of husk or even a tiny stone. This bread forms the bulk of every meal, morning, noon, and night. One mainstream historical fact that completely redefines the diet of ancient Egyptians is that the vast majority of the ancient Egyptian diet was overwhelmingly carbohydrate-based, relying heavily on coarse bread and beer made from emmer wheat and barley, supplemented by legumes, some vegetables, and limited quantities of fish and meat, with culinary monotony and unsanitary food preparation being common realities. Their daily sustenance was functional, not flavorful. Imagine consuming this coarse bread for every meal. It's often dry, easily going stale in the hot climate. While it provided essential calories, its monotonous taste would quickly bore your modern palate. Your teeth, already prone to wear from the grit a preview of later sections on dental health, perhaps would constantly be grinding against this abrasive staple. A particularly quirky tidbit about Egyptian bread is that the grit from the millstones, which was almost unavoidable in their flour, contributed significantly to tooth wear, even more than the coarseness of the grain itself. Archaeologists frequently find the teeth of ancient Egyptians ground down to the pulp by middle age, a direct consequence of their staple food. Imagine your daily bread literally grinding your teeth away, slowly but surely. With every meal, historians still argue whether the apparent high incidence of certain digestive ailments among ancient Egyptians was primarily due to the consumption of coarse, sometimes gritty, bread which could irritate the digestive tract, or if it was more significantly caused by the rampant food contamination from flies, poor hygiene, and contaminated water used in food preparation. Was it the bread itself or the preparation that made stomachs upset? Beyond bread. Your diet might include beer, usually a thick and nutritious, low-alcohol brew made from barley. Remember that from the beverages section on Vikings. It was more like liquid bread, providing both calories and safer hydration than untreated water. You might also eat legumes like lentils and chickpeas, and a limited array of vegetables, onions, garlic, lettuce, cucumbers, often grown in small garden plots or gathered seasonally from the Nile's fertile banks. Fresh produce was fleeting and spoilable in the heat. Meat, typically beef, goat, or poultry, was a luxury, primarily consumed by the wealthy or during special festivals. For the common person, meat was rare, perhaps a bit of dried or salted fish similar to Viking practices, though different species caught from the Nile. When meat was available, its preparation was rudimentary. There was no refrigeration, so spoilage was a constant threat. Meat might be dried, salted, or roasted immediately after slaughter. The absence of strict food safety regulations meant that contamination from flies, rodents, and unwashed hands was common. You eat your meal, trying to ignore the flies landing on your bread, the dust settling on your plate, and the lingering, unpleasant taste of the coarse grain. You chew slowly, your jaw aching, and gulp down your thick beer. Grateful for the calories, but longing for something, anything, with a more appealing flavor. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the heat, the filth, or the dangerous water. It's about the relentless, monotonous, and often unsanitary reality of its food. Your diet, while keeping you alive, was a constant challenge to your palate and your gut, making every meal a stark reminder of the fundamental miseries of ancient sustenance and a gamble against the unseen killers lurking in every bite. Even if your stomach has managed to adapt to the monotonous and unsanitary food, and you've somehow avoided immediate collapse from contaminated water, a far more pervasive and insidious threat relentlessly stalks ancient Egypt disease invisible killers. Forget antibiotics, vaccinations, or modern diagnostic tools. In this ancient land, countless microscopic invaders, from bacteria and viruses to insidious parasites, silently preempted every life, turning every day into a desperate battle against unseen forces that could bring swift, agonizing illness or a slow, debilitating decline. You quickly learn that your body, unaccustomed to such constant assault, is perpetually vulnerable, and that a simple cough or fever could easily become a death sentence. It's like living in a perpetual germ warfare zone where the enemy is invisible, everywhere, and entirely incomprehensible. You feel a persistent cough, a dull ache in your joints, or perhaps a sudden cramp in your gut. These aren't just minor discomforts, they are the insidious whispers of diseases, constantly circulating in the hot, dusty, and unhygienic environment. The air you breathe, the water you drink, the food you eat, and the very ground you walk on are teeming with pathogens, invisible to the naked eye but relentless in their assault. One mainstream historical fact that utterly underscores the fragility of life in ancient Egypt is that ancient Egyptian populations suffered from extremely high rates of infectious diseases, including dysentery, typhoid, tuberculosis, smallpox, and numerous parasitic infections like schistosomiasis due to poor sanitation, contaminated water and food, close living conditions, and the complete absence of modern medical understanding or treatment. Disease was the primary killer, drastically shortening lifespans. Imagine the common ailments that would swiftly debilitate you. Dysentery, caused by contaminated food or water. Remember that dangerous Nile would lead to agonizing stomach cramps, relentless diarrhea, and rapid dehydration, often proving fatal, especially for the young and the weak. Typhoid fever, another waterborne menace, brought high fevers, headaches, and profound weakness, often leading to delirium and death. You would see people collapse in the streets, their bodies ravaged by these relentless digestive diseases, their suffering a common, yet terrifying sight. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the Egyptians' attempts to deal with widespread disease without understanding germs is their reliance on various magical spells and amulets, as well as often bizarre herbal concoctions to ward off or cure illnesses. For instance, specific spells against scorpion bites or snake venom were commonly inscribed on amulets or papyri, demonstrating their belief in the power of words and ritual over unseen dangers. Imagine trying to cure a deadly infection by wearing a necklace with a spell inscribed on it, desperately hoping for divine intervention instead of effective medicine. Historians still argue whether the apparent advanced medical knowledge displayed in some ancient Egyptian surgical texts and anatomical observations likely from mummification. Remember that had any significant impact on the general public health and disease outcomes, or if the sheer prevalence of infectious diseases and a lack of germ theory simply overwhelmed any limited attempts at effective clinical treatment, making daily life inherently unhealthy regardless of medical skill. Did their knowledge save anyone, or was it purely theoretical? Tuberculosis, often affecting bones visible in skeletal remains, lungs, and other organs, was widespread, exacerbated by crowded living conditions and poor ventilation in homes. You might hear the persistent cough of a neighbor, a chilling reminder of the slow, wasting disease. Smallpox, a devastating viral illness, would sweep through communities, leaving survivors disfigured and scarred, or simply claiming countless lives, with no vaccine or understanding of contagion. Parasitic infections were endemic. Schistosomiasis, carried by tiny flatworms living in the Nile, would invade the body through the skin, causing chronic fatigue, organ damage, and a range of debilitating symptoms. Hookworms and roundworms were also common, often from contaminated soil or food, leading to malnutrition and chronic illness. You'd feel the constant itch, the persistent discomfort, knowing your body was host to unseen invaders. Medical care, as we'll delve into more deeply in a later section, was rudimentary. Healers, though skilled in some areas like bone setting, had no understanding of sanitation or germ transmission. Their treatments often involved herbal remedies, poultices, and magical incantations, offering little defense against systemic infections. A wound could quickly fester. A common cold could turn into fatal pneumonia, all without the intervention of modern antibiotics. You feel the constant low-level ache in your stomach, the persistent cough that seems to linger, and the profound, chilling realization that your body is constantly under siege. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the immediate dangers. It's about the pervasive, relentless reality of disease. Every breath, every sip, every touch carries a hidden threat. Your life is a constant, desperate battle against invisible killers, making your body a fragile vessel in a world teeming with pathogens, and a mere fever or stomachache could easily become the abrupt, unceremonious end to your very brief stay in ancient Egypt. Even as your body battles the unseen menace of disease, the visible world of ancient Egypt presents another relentless, maddening assault. Insects and pests' constant annoyance. Forget insect screens, repellents, or pest control services. In this hot, fertile land, you're perpetually tormented by buzzing, biting, crawling, and sometimes venomous creatures, turning every waking moment into a battle against an innumerable, irritating, and often dangerous horde. You quickly learn that your personal space is non-existent, and that your skin is merely a landing strip for a myriad of tiny, unwelcome visitors, making every day an itchy, uncomfortable, and potentially perilous ordeal. It's like living inside a giant, open-air beehive, but the bees are flies, mosquitoes, and worse, and they're all constantly trying to get at you. You swipe instinctively at your face, trying to ward off the relentless swarm of flies that seem to cover every surface, including your skin. They buzz around your eyes, land on your lips, and crawl over any exposed food. These aren't just annoying, they are direct vectors of the diseases we just discussed, carrying pathogens from refuse to your food and open wounds. Their presence is so ubiquitous that you quickly feel a constant, low-level irritation, a never-ending battle against tiny, buzzing tormentors. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this pervasive nuisance is that ancient Egypt, with its hot climate, agricultural practices, and rudimentary sanitation, was constantly plagued by vast populations of insects, particularly flies and mosquitoes, which not only caused immense annoyance, but also acted as vectors for numerous debilitating and fatal diseases, making daily life a continuous struggle against pests. Their sheer numbers were overwhelming. Imagine trying to eat a meal. Every bite is accompanied by the need to shoo away flies, their tiny legs potentially tracking filth from the nearest pile of dung onto your bread. You'd find them in your water, in your beer, constantly buzzing around your face, getting into your eyes, ears, and nostrils. They are relentless, utterly unafraid, and a constant reminder of the unsanitary environment you inhabit. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the Egyptians' desperation against flies is the anecdotal evidence that some wealthier individuals would employ servants whose sole job was to constantly fan them with large palm fronds, not just for coolness, but specifically to keep flies away from their faces during meals or important discussions. Imagine needing a full-time, living fly swatter just to have a conversation in peace. Historians still argue whether the physical and psychological toll of constant insect harassment, beyond their role in disease transmission, significantly impacted the quality of life and productivity of ancient Egyptian society, or if humans simply developed a high tolerance for such annoyances over generations, making it a lesser concern than major threats like famine or war. Did it just annoy them? Or did it subtly wear them down? Then there are the mosquitoes. As dusk falls, especially near the Nile or irrigation canals, swarms of mosquitoes emerge, their high-pitched whine a prelude to the maddening itch of their bites. You'd quickly be covered in red, swollen welts, each one a potential entry point for infection or a vector for diseases like malaria. Remember that from the Roman travel section. It was certainly here in Egypt, too, which would bring recurring fevers, chills, and debilitating weakness. Sleep, if you manage it, is constantly interrupted by their incessant buzzing and biting, robbing you of vital rest. But the insects and pests aren't just annoying. Some are truly dangerous. Scorpions, particularly in arid and rocky areas, would hide in cracks or under stones, their venomous stings causing excruciating pain, swelling, and sometimes even death, especially for children or the elderly. Snakes, though often more reclusive, were also a threat. Their venomous bites a terrifying risk when walking through fields or unsettled areas. You'd learn to tread carefully, to always check your sleeping mat, and to shake out your sandals before putting them on. Cockroaches, beetles, and other crawling insects would infest homes, storage areas, and public spaces, drawn to food scraps and dampness. Your personal belongings, your food, your very body, would be in constant proximity to these creatures, a perpetual reminder of the lack of true cleanliness. You feel the persistent itch of unseen bites, the maddening buzz of flies around your face, and the constant vigilance required to avoid a venomous sting. You are perpetually uncomfortable, your nerves frayed by the relentless assault of tiny, persistent enemies. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the heat, the filth, or the hidden diseases. It's about the pervasive, relentless reality of insects and pests. Your life is a continuous battle against a teeming, biting, crawling horde, turning every moment into an itchy, irritating, and potentially deadly ordeal, making your body a walking buffet for ancient Egypt's most irritating and dangerous inhabitants. Beyond the irritating swarms of insects, venturing outside the immediate confines of a village or city in ancient Egypt brought you face to face with a more primal, terrifying danger. Wild animals, hidden predators. Forget the carefully managed wildlife preserves of today. The ancient Egyptian landscape, particularly the vast deserts, the dense papyrus marshes along the Nile, and the remote oases, was teeming with large, dangerous beasts that posed a very real, existential threat to travelers, farmers, and even those simply fetching water. You quickly learn that nature here isn't just beautiful, it's a constant, deadly game of hide-and-seek, where you're often the prey. It's like living in a perpetual safari gone wrong, where every shadow might conceal a hungry, ancient apex predator. You might be traveling along a dusty track that skirts the edge of the desert, or perhaps making your way through the tall, rustling papyrus reeds near the Nile. The sounds of human activity quickly fade, replaced by the ominous silence of the wilderness, punctuated only by the distant roar of an unseen beast or the sudden splash of something large in the river. Your senses are heightened, constantly scanning the horizon, the undergrowth, and the water for any sign of movement. One mainstream historical fact that underscores this pervasive danger is that ancient Egyptians faced real and consistent threats from dangerous wild animals, including crocodiles and hippopotamuses in the Nile, and lions, hyenas, and venomous snakes in the surrounding deserts and wilderness areas, making travel and daily life outside settled areas inherently perilous. These encounters were not rare occurrences, but a recognized part of life and a significant source of fear. Imagine wading into the shallow waters of the Nile to collect water, or perhaps to fish, your eyes constantly darting across the surface. Suddenly, a pair of reptilian eyes breaks the water, or a silent, dark shape glides beneath the surface. This is a Nile crocodile, an apex predator of the river, capable of dragging a full-grown person under the water in an instant. Or, even more surprisingly, a hippopotamus might emerge, its massive jaws capable of crushing a human body. While often portrayed as gentle giants, hippos are incredibly aggressive and territorial, especially when protecting their young, and were responsible for more human deaths in ancient Africa than any other large animal. You quickly learn that the life-giving Nile, so central to Egyptian civilization, was also a watery grave, teeming with unseen, deadly inhabitants. A particularly quirky tidbit that reveals the depth of Egyptian fear and respect for certain animals is the deification of hippos as the goddess Taweret, a protector of childbirth and fertility, and crocodiles as Sobek, a god of fertility, military prowess, and the Nile, sometimes benevolent, sometimes fearsome. Imagine trying to explain to your modern self that the same animals trying to eat you are also revered as gods or goddesses, blurring the lines between earthly terror and divine power. Historians still argue whether the apparent decline in wild animal populations like lions and hippos in later periods of ancient Egypt was primarily due to increased human population density and habitat destruction through agriculture, or if it was more directly caused by deliberate hunting practices, driven by both self-defense and the desire for prestige as in royal lion hunts. Did humans push them out, or hunt them to near extinction? Beyond the Nile, the vast deserts and wilderness areas harbored their own array of predators. Lions, though gradually becoming rarer in later Egyptian periods, were certainly present, especially in the remote fringes of the desert. A sudden roar in the darkness, or the discovery of fresh tracks near your camp, would send a shiver of primal fear down your spine. Hyenas, too, scavenged and hunted, their chilling cackles echoing in the night. You'd be constantly aware of the need for a strong shelter, a watchful eye, and a roaring fire to deter these nocturnal hunters. Venomous snakes. Remember those from the insects and pests section. They are even more prevalent in the wild, lurking under rocks, in dense vegetation, or in the dry sand. Their bites, swift and often unseen, could lead to agonizing pain, paralysis, and death, with no modern antivenom. Scorpions, too, with their painful, sometimes fatal, stings, posed a constant threat, particularly when camping outdoors. For farmers working in fields near the desert or marshes, the danger was constant. Their livestock could be attacked, their children snatched. Shepherds would carry staffs and daggers, constantly vigilant against predatorial incursions. Even travelers on well-worn paths would travel in groups, armed, knowing that isolation offered easy prey for hungry beasts. You feel the constant tension in your muscles, the quickening of your breath when an unfamiliar sound rustles nearby, and the primal fear that rises when you imagine those hidden eyes watching you from the shadows. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the human-made miseries. It's about the relentless, untamed power of nature itself. Your life is a constant, terrifying gamble against wild animals and hidden predators, turning every step outside settled areas into a potential life-or-death encounter. A chilling reminder that in ancient Egypt, the raw, untamed wilderness was always just a breath away, and you were firmly on its menu. Even if you managed to evade the snapping jaws of crocodiles, the charging fury of hippos, and the unseen menace of scorpions, your most terrifying encounter in ancient Egypt might come not from nature, but from the very people trying to help you. Medical care, primitive, painful. Forget sterile operating rooms, effective medications, or even a basic understanding of germ theory. Ancient Egyptian medicine, for all its occasional ingenuity, was a horrifying blend of rudimentary surgical techniques, often bizarre herbal remedies, and pervasive magical incantations, making any serious illness or injury a terrifying gamble with your life and well-being. You quickly learn that a visit to the healer might inflict as much pain as the ailment itself, and that treatment often meant enduring further suffering with no guarantee of relief. It's like breaking your leg, and your only option is a witch doctor with a blunt knife and a prayer, and you just have to hope for the best. You feel a searing pain in your side, perhaps a bad fall, or a severe infection from a cut. Your body is racked with fever, your head pounding. You're brought to a local healer, or perhaps a temple where priests practiced medicine. The air smells of strange herbs, incense, and something vaguely medicinal, mixed with the ever-present dust and body odor. The instruments are simple bronze scalpels, forceps, bandages made from linen, and various jars of ointments and poultices. There are no gloves, no antiseptic wipes. Cleanliness is a vague concept, not a practiced science. One mainstream historical fact that utterly contrasts with modern healthcare is that ancient Egyptian medical practices, while surprisingly advanced in some areas like bone setting and minor surgery, fundamentally lacked an understanding of germ theory, relied heavily on magical spells and dubious remedies, and often involved painful procedures without effective anesthesia, making treatment for serious illnesses or infections rudimentary and often ineffective, leading to high mortality rates. Your best hope was often your body's own resilience. Imagine the examination. The healer, perhaps a priest-physician or a layman SWW doctor, probes your wound with unwashed hands, his fingers calloused. He might try to set a broken bone with splints of wood and linen, or attempt to close a gaping wound with coarse stitches. The pain excruciating without any anesthesia beyond perhaps a few drops of opium-laced poppy juice, if available, which would merely dull the very sharpest edges. Your screams would fill the air, a common sound in ancient healing centers, a testament to the raw, unfiltered agony of medical intervention. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the bizarre nature of some ancient Egyptian remedies is the widespread use of ingredients like animal dung, moldy bread, or even insect parts in medicinal concoctions. While some of these, like moldy bread, unknowingly containing penicillin, might have had accidental antimicrobial properties, many others were utterly useless or even dangerous. Imagine being prescribed a poultice made from crocodile dung or a drink containing pulverized mouse, desperate to cure a fever. Historians still argue whether the seemingly rational, empirical observations found in some Egyptian medical papyri, like the Edwin Smith papyrus, detailing surgical treatments, truly represent a widespread, systematic approach to medicine that influenced daily practice, or if these advanced texts were primarily theoretical knowledge confined to a small elite of temple-trained physicians, with the majority of the population relying on less sophisticated, more magical remedies and folk healers. Was it scientific brilliance or practical superstition that dominated their healthcare? Pain management was primitive. Beyond the occasional use of opium or mandrake, there was little to alleviate suffering during procedures or from chronic ailments. You simply endured the pain, clenching your teeth, your body writhing in agony, relying on your own stoicism and desperation for survival. Infections. As we've discussed, remember, disease invisible killers were rampant, and doctors had no understanding of how to prevent or treat them effectively. A simple cut could quickly become a festering, gangrenous wound, leading to amputation again, performed without anesthesia, and highly risky or a slow, agonizing death from sepsis. You'd see men and women with missing limbs, blind eyes, or faces disfigured by diseases that, today, would be easily treated. For chronic illnesses, treatments often involved lengthy purification rituals, magical incantations, and elaborate offerings to gods. While providing psychological comfort, these offered little real medical efficacy. You might be told to wear a specific amulet, or to avoid certain foods, as your only defense against a debilitating ailment. You feel the sharp, raw pain of an untreated wound, the dull ache of a festering infection, and the profound, chilling realization that your body is utterly at the mercy of forces you cannot see and treatments you cannot comprehend. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the external dangers, it's about the terrifying reality of their medical care. Your life, your health, and your very existence would constantly be hanging by a thread, utterly vulnerable to the smallest ailment or injury. Making a visit to the healer a gamble as dangerous as any encounter with a wild animal, a grim testament to the profound limitations and pervasive suffering inherent in a world without modern medicine. Even if your body somehow miraculously resisted the invisible onslaught of disease and recovered from the ministrations of ancient healers, your very attire in ancient Egypt would present a constant, subtle source of misery. Clothing uncomfortable, restrictive. Forget the soft, breathable fabrics and diverse styles of your modern wardrobe. Ancient Egyptian clothing, while practical for the climate, was often coarse, prone to chafing, and surprisingly restrictive in its simplicity, becoming a constant low-level discomfort that you couldn't escape. You quickly learned that fashion was secondary to function, and comfort was a luxury rarely afforded by the scratchy realities of ancient textiles. It's like being forced to wear the same rough linen sheet draped over your body every single day, no matter what you're doing, and it's always slightly itchy. You adjust the simple linen tunic draped around your body. It's light-colored, often white, designed to reflect the relentless sun and help wick away sweat. Remember that. From Section 2, the scorching sun, but the fabric itself, made from flax fibers, is not always as soft and smooth as modern, finely processed linen. It can be coarse, stiff, and prone to wrinkling, chafing against your skin as you move. Your body, accustomed to the smooth embrace of cotton blends or moisture-wicking synthetics, constantly feels the subtle scratchiness, a persistent, low-level irritation that never quite goes away. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the basic nature of their clothing is that ancient Egyptian clothing was predominantly made from linen, a fabric derived from flax, and was typically simple in design tunics, kilts, dresses, chosen for its breathability in the hot climate, but often characterized by a rough texture, lack of elasticity, and monochromatic appearance for the common populace. Elaborate dyes and finer weaves were generally reserved for the wealthy. Imagine your entire wardrobe consisting of variations of a bedsheet. Imagine the relentless sun beating down again. From Section 2. While the linen helps, it doesn't eliminate the heat entirely. The simple, draped style of clothing, while seemingly free-flowing, could sometimes be surprisingly restrictive. A kilt might hamper your movement if you need to run or climb, while a tight, sheath-like dress for women would restrict your stride. There were no elastic waistbands, no stretchy fabrics, no designs engineered for ergonomic movement. You moved with your clothes, not in them. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the pragmatic use of fabric, even for something as basic as underwear, is the use of triangular loincloths for both men and women, worn beneath their tunics or kilts. These were often made of the same coarse linen and tied securely, providing minimal coverage and comfort, but maximum breathability in the hot climate. Imagine your underwear being a rough, triangular piece of fabric, tied with strings. All day long, historians still argue whether the apparent lack of more complex tailoring and varied clothing styles in ancient Egypt was primarily due to the technological limitations of textile production and fabric cutting, making simpler draped garments more practical, or if it also reflected a cultural preference for functional simplicity and a social structure where elaborate dress was strictly reserved as a marker of elite status. Was it a lack of skill, or a social statement, that made clothing so simple? The constant dust, dirt, and sweat from Section 3. Remember that body odor would quickly accumulate on your linen garments. Without modern washing machines or detergents, cleaning clothes was a laborious process, often involving pounding them with sticks in the Nile. Remember that contaminated water from Section 4, or rubbing them with natron or plant ashes. This meant your clothes were rarely truly clean, often carrying a faint, musty odor and a perpetual film of grime, exacerbating the scratchiness and discomfort against your skin. You'd always feel a bit grimy, even in freshly washed clothes. Footwear was also basic. Sandals were common, made of papyrus, leather, or woven fibers, offering some protection from the hot ground but little cushioning or support. For much of the population, walking barefoot was also common, leading to hardened, calloused feet, but also increased risk of cuts, infections, and parasitic infestations from the ground. Your modern feet, accustomed to soft shoes, would quickly protest. Accessories were minimal for the common person, perhaps a simple belt, or a piece of jewelry if you were lucky. The elaborate wigs, ornate collars, and complex headwear seen in tomb paintings were mostly for the elite, not for your everyday attire. Your personal appearance would be defined by its stark simplicity, its functionality, and its inevitable grunginess. You feel the persistent scratchiness of the linen against your skin, the damp cling of sweat, and the constant awareness of the dust that permeates every fiber. You adjust your kilt, feeling it shift uncomfortably as you walk, wishing for something soft, something stretchy, something that simply feels clean. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the external dangers, it's about the pervasive, low-level misery of your clothing. Your attire, while functional, was a constant source of discomfort, turning the simple act of getting dressed into a daily reminder of the pervasive lack of modern comforts, ensuring that even your own body was a site of continuous, subtle torment in a world that prioritized practicality over personal ease. Even if your body somehow adapted to the relentless sun, the pervasive filth, the dangerous water, the monotonous food, the invisible diseases, the tormenting insects, the lurking wild animals, the primitive medical care, and the uncomfortable clothing. Another, more insidious force would define your every interaction and limit your every aspiration. Social status harsh hierarchy. Forget modern notions of social mobility or equality of opportunity. Ancient Egypt was a rigidly stratified society, where your birth determined your place, and moving outside of your assigned caste was virtually impossible. You quickly learn that your freedom, your dignity, and your very survival are utterly dependent on your inherited position, and that the vast majority of the population exists to serve the elite, often with brutal consequences. It's like being born into a colossal, unchanging pyramid, where your entire life is confined to the specific tier you were born into, with no stairs connecting the levels. You are immediately placed. Your accent, your strange clothes, your bewildered demeanor, all mark you as an anomaly. But the system quickly assigns you a place. Are you a free peasant, a craftsman, or perhaps, most likely, an enslaved person? Your status dictates where you can live, what kind of work you can do, who you can speak to, and what protections, if any, the law affords you. This isn't a subtle social ladder. It's a series of unyielding, often brutal, tiers. At the very top sits the pharaoh, a divine king, absolute ruler of all Egypt. Beneath him are the priests and high officials. The scribes remember how prestigious literacy was, and military commanders. These are the powerful elite, living lives of relative luxury, wealth, and privilege, far removed from your daily struggles. You might glimpse them, carried in litters or riding in chariots. Their fine linen and elaborate jewelry a stark contrast to your own simple attire and calloused hands. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines this rigid system is that ancient Egyptian society was characterized by a strict, hereditary social hierarchy, with the pharaoh at the apex, followed by priests, nobles, scribes, and military officials, while the vast majority of the population consisted of peasants, farmers, and a significant class of enslaved individuals, with very limited social mobility between these strata. Your birth determined your destiny, and escaping your caste was incredibly rare. Imagine trying to appeal to someone higher up the chain. A peasant couldn't simply walk into the palace to complain about a corrupt official. Justice, favors, and opportunities flowed downwards, not upwards. Your interactions would be limited to those of your own social standing, or with officials whose authority over you was absolute. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the meticulousness of this social stratification is the detailed records kept by scribes concerning land ownership, grain yields, and even the census of individuals, all meticulously categorized by their social function and their relationship to the state or temple. Imagine a bureaucratic system so precise it knew exactly where everyone fit in the grand scheme of things, down to how many handfuls of grain you were expected to produce. Historians still argue whether the apparent stability and longevity of ancient Egyptian civilization despite its rigid social hierarchy and widespread use of forced labor, was primarily due to the deeply ingrained religious belief in a divine order with the pharaoh as a god-king that legitimized the system, or if it was maintained through a combination of effective administration, economic control, and the constant threat of state violence against dissenters. Was it divine right, or pure control, that maintained such a strict order? For the peasant, life was a continuous cycle of agricultural labor, often tied to the land, subject to heavy taxes paid in grain or labor, and compelled to participate in state projects like temple or pyramid building. Remember those arduous jobs. Your entire existence would be dedicated to feeding the state and its elite, with little surplus for yourself. For the enslaved, the situation was even more dire. You were property, not a person. Remember that from the Roman Empire's awful jobs, with no rights, no freedom, and utterly at the mercy of your owner. You could be bought, sold, punished, or even killed, with no legal recourse. Your labor was simply an asset to be exploited, whether in mines, quarries, or private households. You feel the invisible chains of your social status, the constant awareness of your place, and the utter lack of agency. You watch the elite pass by, their lives of leisure a universe away from your daily grind, and you know that the gap between your worlds is unbridgeable. To challenge this system was unthinkable, and often fatal. The very landscape of Egypt, with its monumental temples and tombs, constantly reinforced this hierarchy. The grand tombs of pharaohs and nobles stood in stark contrast to the simple, shallow graves of the common people, a testament to how even in death, social status dictated your eternal fate. You feel the weight of countless generations of social stratification pressing down on you. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the physical dangers, it's about the relentless, unforgiving reality of its harsh social hierarchy. Your life, your opportunities, and your very worth are instantly and irrevocably determined by your birth or circumstance, condemning you to an existence of subservience and pervasive lack of freedom. A constant reminder that in ancient Egypt, the greatest monuments were often built on the unseen backs of a society rigidly divided, with precious little room for escape. Even if you somehow navigated the rigid social hierarchy of ancient Egypt without causing offense, the empire's method of maintaining order presented another terrifying reality. Justice brutal, arbitrary. Forget modern due process, lawyers, or predictable sentencing. Ancient Egyptian law, while theoretically based on concepts of truth and divine order, was often swiftly and cruelly administered, with punishments that could be agonizing, disfiguring, or fatal, often at the whim of local officials or powerful individuals. You quickly learn that a transgression, however minor, could lead to a disproportionately harsh penalty, and that justice here was less about fairness and more about maintaining social control through fear. It's like being in a game where the rules are unclear, and the referee can decide to break your legs just for questioning a call. You might witness a public punishment in the marketplace, or hear whispers of someone being dragged before a local magistrate. The justice system, while organized, was deeply intertwined with religious and social authority. Pharaoh was the ultimate lawgiver, seen as the embodiment of Ma'at cosmic order and justice, but in practice, local officials, priests, and military commanders administered the law, often with significant leeway. This decentralized enforcement could lead to inconsistencies and arbitrary decisions, making justice feel less like an impartial force and more like a gamble. One mainstream historical fact that utterly contrasts with modern legal systems is that ancient Egyptian justice often involved harsh corporal punishments, including flogging, mutilation like cutting off noses or ears, forced labor in mines, and execution by burning, impalement, or drowning, particularly for lower-class individuals and enslaved people, aiming to deter crime through public spectacle and severe retribution. Imprisonment as a primary punishment rather than a holding place was rare. Imagine a man, accused of theft, being publicly flogged. You hear the sharp crack of the whip against his bare back, the man's cries echoing through the bustling market. The pain is agonizing, designed not just to punish the individual, but to serve as a stark warning to the assembled crowd. You avert your gaze, but the sounds are inescapable, etching themselves into your memory. This was a common sight, a daily reminder of the state's power to inflict suffering. A particularly quirky tidbit that reveals the arbitrary nature of some punishments is the use of forced labor in dangerous mines or quarries as a common sentence for various crimes. Individuals, regardless of their original profession, could be condemned to a life of brutal, back-breaking toil, often leading to premature death. Remember those Roman miners, Egyptian mines were just as bad, if not worse. Imagine being sentenced to a literal death by hard labor for a minor offense, simply because your body was deemed useful to the state. Historians still argue whether the extreme severity of ancient Egyptian punishments was primarily a reflection of a truly brutal and unforgiving society with little regard for individual rights, or if it was a pragmatic necessity for social control in a large, densely populated agrarian society that lacked widespread police forces and relied on public deterrence to maintain order. Was it about cruelty or efficiency that fueled such harsh justice? Mutilation was also a grim reality. For crimes like perjury, repeated theft, or sometimes even for adultery, a person might have their nose or ears cut off, leaving a permanent, disfiguring mark that branded them as a criminal for life. This public disfigurement served as a constant reminder of their transgression and ensured their social ostracism, a punishment that lasted far beyond the initial pain. For the most serious crimes, treason, grave sacrilege, or large-scale rebellion, execution was the ultimate penalty. Methods could be terrifyingly cruel, including burning alive, particularly for those who committed crimes against the gods or the pharaoh, impalement, or drowning in the Nile, a chilling echo of a sacred river becoming an instrument of death. These executions were often public, designed to instill maximum terror and reinforce the absolute power of the pharaoh and his officials. For enslaved individuals, justice was even more arbitrary. Their master held almost absolute power and could inflict punishment, even death, with little to no legal repercussion. If an enslaved person committed a crime against a free person, the punishment would be far more severe than for a free person committing the same offense. You would have no recourse, no right to appeal, no voice in the legal system. You feel a knot of fear in your stomach, a constant tension, knowing that a simple misunderstanding, an unintentional offense, or merely being in the wrong place at the wrong time could land you in the grim embrace of this unforgiving system. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the physical discomforts, it's about the ever-present threat of brutal, arbitrary justice. Your life, your body, and your dignity are constantly at the mercy of a system that prioritized order and the display of power over individual rights, making every transgression a gamble with terrifying, irreversible consequences. A chilling reminder that in ancient Egypt, the law could be as swift and unforgiving as the desert wind. Even if you somehow manage to endure the brutal heat, the pervasive filth, the constant threat of disease, and the arbitrary nature of justice, another, perhaps more isolating, reality would immediately render you utterly helpless. Language barrier, utter confusion. Forget universal English or convenient translation apps. In ancient Egypt, you'd be plunged into a world where every spoken word is an incomprehensible jumble of unfamiliar sounds, rendering you mute, deaf, and profoundly disconnected from the very people around you. You quickly learn that your survival depends on basic gestures and desperate charades, and that even the simplest request becomes an insurmountable challenge, turning every interaction into a frustrating, isolating ordeal. It's like being dropped into a foreign country where absolutely no one speaks your language, and there are no signs you can read, forever trapped in a bubble of bewildering sounds. You try to ask for water, pointing to your parched throat. The words that come out of your mouth are swallowed by the cacophony of the market, utterly meaningless to the vendor you're gesturing at. They stare back, confused, perhaps irritated. Their responses are a torrent of sounds that hold no meaning for you, the complex, phonetic clicks and guttural stops of ancient Egyptian. A language as alien to your ears as hieroglyphs are to your eyes. You feel a wave of desperate frustration, realizing that the most basic human need, communication, is utterly denied to you. One mainstream historical fact that utterly underscores this immediate challenge is that the ancient Egyptian language, written in hieroglyphs and spoken in various dialects of what is now called the Egyptian language, was entirely distinct from any modern European language, creating an insurmountable communication barrier for any contemporary visitor without years of dedicated study. This meant basic interaction, let alone understanding complex social or legal nuances, was virtually impossible. Imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread, and the baker is speaking in a series of squawks and clicks, while you can only grunt. Imagine trying to navigate the city. The signs, if there are any, are in hieroglyphs, complex pictorial symbols that convey both sounds and meanings, utterly undecipherable to you. You can't read the names of streets, the prices of goods, or the instructions from officials. Every journey becomes a perilous gamble, every purchase a game of charades, every question unanswered. You are functionally illiterate and mute in this ancient world, stripped of one of your most fundamental human abilities. A particularly quirky tidbit that highlights the importance of language and translation in ancient Egypt is the existence of specialized scribes who acted as interpreters, particularly in foreign trade or diplomatic dealings. These individuals, often fluent in multiple ancient languages like Akkadian or Hittite, were highly valued. Imagine a world where professional translators were as rare and essential as brain surgeons, needed for even basic interactions between different cultures. Historians still argue whether the lack of a universal lingua franca common language in the ancient world, like Latin or Greek in later eras, primarily contributed to greater cultural isolation and less cross-cultural understanding, or if it fostered a deeper appreciation for local dialects and specialized interpretation skills among those who did traverse linguistic boundaries. Did it divide, or specialize, humanity? Your interactions would be limited to basic gestures, pointing, and perhaps drawing crude pictures in the dust. You might be able to convey simple needs, hunger, thirst, pain, through desperate pantomime, but anything more complex would result in utter confusion, frustration, and potentially dangerous misunderstandings. An innocent gesture could be misinterpreted as an insult, a polite question as a challenge. The social and political implications of this language barrier are immense. You couldn't ask for help if you were in trouble, couldn't understand a legal summons, couldn't protest an injustice. You are utterly at the mercy of others' interpretations of your nonverbal cues. This vulnerability would make you an easy target for exploitation, for being cheated in transactions, or simply for being ignored, as people would quickly tire of trying to decipher your meaning. The sounds of the city, once a cacophony, now become a constant, bewildering hum. You hear laughter, arguments, shouts of command, but the meaning is lost. It's like listening to a radio station in a language you don't understand. The sounds are there, but the content is utterly absent, leaving you feeling profoundly disconnected and isolated. Even the most basic human connection, a shared joke or a comforting word, is impossible. You feel the frustration boiling in your gut, the profound helplessness of being unable to communicate, to express your fears, your needs, or your thoughts. You try to mimic a sound, a phrase, only to be met with blank stares or polite corrections you don't understand. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the physical dangers, it's about the relentless, soul-crushing reality of the language barrier. Your voice is silenced, your understanding obliterated, leaving you adrift in a sea of utter confusion. A permanent alien in a world where every word spoken, every sign written, is a code you can never hope to crack. Ensuring your survival would be a constant, isolating battle against incomprehension. Even if you somehow navigated the intense heat, the pervasive filth, the deadly water, the monotonous food, the invisible diseases, the tormenting insects, the lurking wild animals, the primitive medical care, and the crushing language barrier, an even more profound existential threat would hang over your head in ancient Egypt slavery. Ever-present threat. Forget the subtle nuances of social class. Here, the very concept of personal freedom was fragile, and for countless individuals, life meant being legally owned, utterly powerless, and condemned to brutal, unending labor at the whim of another. You quickly learn that your dignity, your choices, and your very body are not your own, and that even a misstep or misfortune could plunge you into an inescapable existence of bondage. It's like being a permanent piece of property, where your entire purpose is to toil for someone else, and your only real fear is the whip. You walk through the bustling streets, and you see them everywhere, yet they are often designed to be overlooked the enslaved. Their faces might be impassive, their movements weary, their clothing simple and often ragged. They are grinding grain, hauling water, building structures, serving food, and working in the fields or quarries. Their presence is so ubiquitous, so fundamental to the functioning of Egyptian society, that it's almost invisible to the free inhabitants. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines this pervasive institution is that slavery was a widespread and fundamental institution throughout ancient Egyptian history, with enslaved individuals, acquired through war, debt, or birth, comprising a significant portion of the workforce, performing arduous labor across all sectors of society, and having virtually no legal rights or personal freedom. Their exploitation underpinned much of Egypt's economic and monumental achievements. Imagine the casual cruelty. You might witness an overseer striking an enslaved laborer for a perceived laziness, or hear the sharp crack of a whip echoing from a nearby construction site. There is no public outcry, no legal recourse for the enslaved person. Their suffering is simply the accepted reality of their status. Their body is legally considered property, no different from an ox or a tool, and their owner has near absolute power over their life and well-being. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the precariousness of life for some enslaved individuals is that while most were engaged in manual labor, some were highly skilled, working as scribes, artisans, musicians, or even household managers for wealthy families. However, regardless of their skill or responsibility, their legal status remained that of property, and they could be bought, sold, or separated from their families at any moment. Imagine being a brilliant craftsman or a skilled musician, creating works of art, but knowing you could be traded for a bag of grain at any moment. Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of large-scale slave rebellions in ancient Egypt compared to, say, Rome indicates a more paternalistic or mild form of slavery, where enslaved individuals were largely content or integrated, or if it was simply due to extremely effective state control, the overwhelming power of the pharaoh, and the lack of opportunities for large-scale organization among a diverse enslaved population. Was it relative leniency or absolute control that kept them compliant? Your freedom, as a modern person, would be your greatest vulnerability. If you were mistaken for an escaped enslaved person, perhaps due to your unusual clothing or your inability to communicate, or if you fell into debt, or if you were captured by raiding parties from neighboring lands, you could quickly find yourself thrust into this horrifying reality. Once enslaved, escape was incredibly difficult, almost impossible in such a vast, controlled empire, and the consequences of being caught were brutal. Your days would be consumed by relentless labor, from dawn till dusk, under the scorching sun or in the damp, dusty confines of a workshop. Your food would be meager, your clothing basic, your living quarters cramped and unsanitary. You would have no say in your life, no ability to make your own choices, no hope for a future beyond servitude. Every breath, every movement, would be dictated by the will of your owner. The emotional and psychological toll would be immense. The constant threat of punishment, the dehumanization, the separation from family, the utter lack of control over your own destiny. These are burdens that would crush your spirit far more effectively than any physical labor. You would become a silent, enduring presence. Your face a mask of resignation. Your spirit slowly eroding under the weight of bondage. You feel the invisible chains, the constant fear of being caught, of being made property, of losing every shred of your autonomy. The awful truth about surviving a day in ancient Egypt isn't just about the external dangers. It's about the pervasive, chilling reality of slavery. Your very freedom is a precarious illusion, always just a single misstep or unfortunate circumstance away from being extinguished, making your life a constant, terrifying gamble against becoming another faceless, silent, and utterly exploited laborer in the vast, unforgiving engine of ancient Egyptian power. After enduring the scorching sun, the pervasive filth, the deadly water, the monotonous food, the invisible diseases, the tormenting insects, the lurking wild animals, the primitive medical care, the uncomfortable clothing, the harsh social hierarchy, the brutal justice, the bewildering language barrier, and the ever-present threat of slavery, you finally emerge from your terrifying plunge into ancient Egypt to confront its complex and enduring legacy, enduring myths, harsh reality. The images of golden pharaohs, monumental pyramids, and serene goddesses dominate our popular imagination. But the truth of daily life for most ancient Egyptians was a brutal, difficult, and often short existence, utterly devoid of the romantic grandeur we often project upon it. You realize that the very allure of ancient Egypt is built upon a selective historical memory, overlooking the grim, often horrifying truths of everyday survival. It's like admiring a magnificent, jewel-encrusted mask, only to realize that beneath it lies the shriveled, fragile reality of a mummified corpse, full of unseen perils. You reflect on the vivid contrasts. The towering pyramids, symbols of eternal power and architectural genius, were built by immense, often forced, labor under the scorching sun, by people suffering from the very diseases and hardships you've just experienced. The intricate tomb paintings depicting idyllic afterlives gloss over the pervasive illnesses, the constant discomfort, and the grinding toil that defined mortal existence. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this pervasive disparity is that while ancient Egypt achieved unparalleled monumental architecture, advanced artistry, and a complex religious system, the daily lives of the vast majority of its population were characterized by significant hardship, limited resources, constant health threats, and often a lack of personal freedom. A stark contrast to the idealized images often presented by its elite monuments. The grandeur of the few often obscured the struggle of the many. Imagine the disconnect. Modern tourists marvel at artifacts in climate-controlled museums, pristine and beautiful, but you remember the smell of the market, the flies, the unsanitary conditions that surrounded every aspect of daily life, the gold and precious jewels, often recovered from tombs. Speak of immense wealth. But for you, the experience was one of near constant hunger, unreliable water, and the knowledge that your simple meal might be contaminated. A particularly quirky tidbit that exemplifies this gap between myth and reality is the sheer optimism and focus on joy depicted in much ancient Egyptian art. Despite the harsh realities of their daily lives, their tomb paintings often show scenes of feasting, dancing, and thriving agriculture, portraying an idealized existence in both life and the afterlife. Imagine a people living in squalor and constant threat, yet meticulously decorating their tombs with images of endless banquets and eternal parties. Historians still argue whether this pervasive optimism in Egyptian art and religious texts was primarily a genuine reflection of a society deeply committed to a joyful afterlife and divine order, allowing them to psychologically cope with hardship, or if it was also a deliberate form of elite propaganda, projecting an image of stability and abundance that masked the widespread poverty and suffering of the common populace. Was it a profound faith, or an artful deception, that shaped their enduring image? The very endurance of ancient Egypt, its thousands of years of continuous civilization, is a testament to the resilience of its people, but also to the effectiveness of its harsh social controls. The power of the pharaoh, the rigidity of the social hierarchy, and the often brutal justice system all contributed to maintaining order amidst the pervasive dangers and discomforts of daily life. Survival was a daily triumph, not a given. The legacy of ancient Egypt in our modern world is undeniable. Its pyramids, its hieroglyphs, its mummies, its powerful mythology. It continues to fascinate, inspire, and intrigue. But to truly understand it, you must peel back the layers of romanticism and confront the raw, uncomfortable truths of existence for the average person. The advancements in medicine were rudimentary against the tide of disease. The comfort of the elite was built on the sweat of the enslaved. The very language that tells their stories is now silent to us. You stand now, a spectral figure from the future, looking back at a civilization that defied the odds to build wonders, but demanded an unimaginable toll from its people. The awful truth about why you wouldn't survive a day in ancient Egypt isn't just a collection of historical facts. It's a chilling reminder of how profoundly different the past was, how fragile human life could be, and how much we take for granted in our modern comforts and safety. The enduring myths of golden splendor are powerful, but the harsh reality of its daily dangers, the constant struggle for existence against an unforgiving environment, a brutal social system, and an array of unseen killers, is the true, unforgettable legacy etched into the very dust and sand of Egypt. A stark monument to both human achievement and human suffering. Now, as the golden glow of the pyramids fades and the echoes of ancient life grow quiet, let the stillness of your room embrace you. The relentless sun, the pervasive smells, the hidden diseases, and the daily struggles of ancient Egypt are safely in the past, part of a history that now dissolves into the gentle hum of your fan. You've journeyed through a challenging and often brutal world. And now, it's time for you to find your own peaceful rest. Let your mind unwind, your muscles relax, and sink into a deep, undisturbed sleep, far from the harsh realities of ancient Egypt.